Daughter of silence. A secret of kings and a love that silences its truth. Between spirits and men, a sealed destiny. Anya Lysander. Epigraph. To love is not to possess, but to remember someone, even in forgetting. Some loves are never named, only recognized in silence. Summary. Ealasaid Yorkshire has lived her life, surrounded by secrets and silences, marked by the mystery of her lineage, and the sacrifices of those who protected her. When fate forces her to leave England to marry Evander Rutherford, a feared and formidable laird of the Highlands, she finds herself caught between tradition and her own longing for freedom. Though she does not fear Evander, whose commanding presence fills every corner of the room, Ealasaid fears the future others have planned for her. She is determined to avoid a marriage of convenience at all costs. Her heart longs for love, but Evander, a man of steadfast principles and deep loyalty to his clan, is convinced that their union must be one of duty, not desire. Ealasaid will fight to convince him to break the engagement, but Evander has his own reasons for refusing. Burdened by the past and the weight of responsibility, he is prepared to sacrifice his own heart for the good of his people. But Ealasaid refuses to surrender. Love is not something to be bargained for, especially when her soul burns with it. What neither of them knows is that the real challenge is not just the marriage arranged by William I, King of Scotland, but the hidden bond that ties their destinies together. As the young woman fights for her happiness, she discovers that the forces of the past, both human and supernatural, have already shaped her path. In the Highlands, where the spirits of nature whisper forgotten secrets, Ealasaid will learn that her heart belongs to a fate far greater and older than any human will. As the two grow closer, they will come to understand that there is something more powerful than obligation or sacrifice, true love. But to reach it, they must unravel the secrets of their bloodline, break the chains of duty, and confront the forces that have long waited for their story to unfold. Will love be enough to break the destiny that binds them, or are they doomed to live in the shadow of choices made by others? Chapter 1. Scotland, in the year of our Lord 1188. The land does not forget the one who honors it. While Henry II reigns in England, William I rules the Scottish Highlands, known as William the Lion for the red rampant lion banner waving over a golden field. Under his command, Scotland fights to remain free from England's shadow, weaving alliances among clans and nobles through marriages more imposed than desired. In these lands of wild mountains, isolated castles and ancient oaths, a young Englishwoman crosses the border not as a conqueror, but as a bargaining chip. Ealasaid Yorkshire stood before the drawbridge, gazing at the landscape that had accompanied her on the long, exhausting journey from England. Despite the weariness in her bones, she couldn't deny the journey had been worth it. What she had imagined as wild, desolate lands turned out to be mountains rising like moss-covered giants, their peaks lost in low clouds that seemed to caress the sky. Dark, deep lochs, crystalline waterfalls tumbling from above, and the cheerful song of birds composed an unexpected symphony no one had ever told her about. Ealasaid loved nature. She had grown up running through her father's lands, free, among horses and butterflies. Her soul found peace among trees and wind, not within walls. The Highlands, under different circumstances, would have seemed like paradise. But she was neither a traveller nor a guest. She had been promised to the feared laird of Clan Rutherford. She had known since childhood that she would not marry for love. That privilege, if it existed at all, belonged to peasant girls. And though her dreamy mind had imagined being the exception, reality now settled in with unwavering force. She hadn't begged her father to break the engagement. It was the king himself who had decreed it, and she was obedient. She would not bring shame upon her family, even if it broke her heart. Yet, standing before the imposing fortress, she wondered if the tales of Rutherford ferocity were true. Perhaps Evander, the laird, wasn't the monster everyone spoke of. Perhaps he too wished to break the betrothal. As a woman, she had no voice. But he did. He could oppose the Scottish king's command, after all it wasn't his king. She had never asked, it wasn't proper for a lady to show interest in men's affairs. The groan of the bridge returning to life pulled her from her thoughts. The wood slowly lowered over the moat, and with it a shiver ran down her spine. Not from fear of the castle, but of the people who lived within. Animals had never frightened her, humans had. Ealasaid was quiet, reserved. Her mother used to say she lived in her own world. And in part it was true, that world was full of creatures who understood her, like Eloan, her mare. She had witnessed her birth, and from that moment on a deep silent bond had formed between them. Eloan sensed her fear, her anxiety, her resignation. Now the mare tilted her head, as if asking whether they were truly going to cross that bridge. "Everything will be fine," Ealasaid whispered, stroking her flank. The mare snorted, uncertain but obeyed. Together they began to cross, accompanied by the groan of chains and the whistle of the wind, sounds she had known since she left her childhood home. Only this time it wasn't a farewell, but an uncertain welcome. A new life awaited her. A life she did not want. Chapter 2. Each creature carries within itself the memory of its origin. Ealasaid wondered what had become of the men who had dared to stand against him. She didn't have to wait long for the answer. When she looked up, she caught the shadow of a smile on his face, a smile that offered no comfort. No one was meant to survive to tell the tale. The words she had heard about her betrothed echoed back to her. What if they weren't just whispered exaggerations? "Am I not what you expected?" The courtesy in his tone didn't quite mask the irony. Ealasaid felt her reaction had been read as an offense, though she hadn't meant it that way. "No, yes," she stammered, her voice caught between nerves and uncertainty. "Have I asked you such a difficult question, milady?" There was no doubt. He was enjoying himself at her expense. But she wouldn't fall into his provocations. She had learned that grace, even in discomfort, was the finest armor. "No, my lord. I beg your pardon. I'm weary from the journey. I meant no disrespect." He narrowed his eyes. His silence spoke more than any words. He had sensed her deflection. "You are not what I expected," he murmured as he stepped closer. Each of his steps echoed through the hall with a confidence that commanded. He was master of this place, its stones, its shadows, the time measured between heartbeats. And suddenly, time itself seemed to stop. Ealasaid held her breath. Fear. Or perhaps respect. Or something deeper, indefinable, that kept her still. "Have I disappointed you, my lord?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He raised a hand, brushed her chin, catching a loose strand of hair. The touch sent a shiver through her. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something more visceral, more ancient. Too real. "I didn't imagine you so red-haired," he said at last, lowering his hand. He stepped back and she could breathe again. "My mother says I inherited it from my grandmother," she offered, almost automatically. He let out a short, joyless laugh. "I actually expected it to be blonde." "Blonde," she repeated, confused. "The color of wheat." "And why did you imagine that?" "Red is like fire, warm, burning, milady." "Is there fire in you?" The way he said it wasn't mere flattery. It was a question that grazed the skin. He leaned in again, touching her with a familiarity that wasn't tender but intense, as if seeking a deeper answer. "Aren't you going to answer me?" But before she could speak, a woman entered the room. She wore the clan's colors and was clearly pregnant, though she moved with a grace that belied her condition. "Apologies for the delay. I was attending a birth, and my gown ended up a disaster." Evander grunted, stepping away from Ealasaid. "Are you a midwife?" Ealasaid asked, grateful for the interruption. "Not at all. The midwife refused to come, so I had to do it myself." "Why did she refuse? Is the baby all right?" The woman laughed brightly. "All 4 pups are healthy, as is their mother." Ealasaid released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "A dog. You must think I'm mad, and terribly rude. I haven't even introduced myself. I'm Isbale." And that ill-mannered man over there is my husband Struan, she said, pointing to a redhead watching from the shadows. You're a redhead, Ealasaid murmured without thinking. That's right, Isbale chimed in with a smile. I hope our baby inherits his color. Mine is far too plain. I like it, Ealasaid admitted. Isbale, Evander's voice came from the window, my betrothed and I were having a conversation. The tension returned instantly, though Isbale didn't seem to notice. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was dying to meet your betrothed. Is that a blackberry tart? Yes, Ealasaid replied with a trace of relief. Perhaps she had wanted that conversation with Evander, but not in those terms. Not with that gaze that seemed to take her apart from the inside. And though he hadn't been rude, she didn't feel at ease. I'd sell my soul to the devil for a slice, Isbale joked, sitting down with ease. Ealasaid followed suit. Hunger won out. Isbale Struan interjected, the dog needs you. She's perfectly fine. But our baby wants sugar. You don't want an early arrival, do you? Struan went pale. He rushed over at once. Are you unwell? Just a little faint. The tart will fix it. And a chat with my new sister too. A disbelieving laugh echoed in the room. It didn't come from Struan, but from Evander. Ealasaid saw him shake his head, glaring at Isbale. She, however, seemed unfazed. Her eyes were only for her husband, as if the tension had nothing to do with her. Struan kissed his wife before straightening up. He approached Evander, and whispered something in his ear. The laird frowned but eventually nodded with reluctance. Don't miss me too much, he said to Ealasaid, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes before disappearing with his friend. The door closed behind them, and it was as if someone had loosened an invisible knot. Ealasaid barely noticed she had been holding her breath, or that her shoulders had been tense the whole time. It wasn't fear, she told herself. But there was something about him that disrupted the usual rhythm of things. Something that forced her to stay on guard, as if she didn't know which version of herself to show him. You don't have to stay if you're feeling faint, said Isbale then with genuine concern. I've never felt stronger, she replied with a radiant smile, taking another bite. But it was the only way to get you alone. Ealasaid looked at her cautiously. That kind of frankness wasn't what she had expected from a lady of her rank, nor from the wife of the laird's closest friend. Did you deceive your husband, milady? The question slipped out before she could soften the tone. Maybe it was the surprise that pushed her to say it so plainly, without filters. Struan is like a brother to Evander. And since you'll soon be his wife, let's drop the formalities. Call me Isbale if you please, and I'll call you Ealasaid. She nodded without resistance. There was something about the woman she didn't quite understand. Trust perhaps. Or envy. Or a confusing mix of both. And to answer your question. No. My husband would never allow himself to be manipulated, she said, with a mischievous spark in her eyes. But he knows I always get what I want, so he lets me have my way the first time and spares himself the trouble. Ealasaid looked at her, unsure whether to admire that confidence or be wary of it. It wasn't often one heard a woman speak so openly about her marriage, let alone with that steady, effortless joy that seemed to rise straight from her belly. For a moment, she wondered if she'd ever be able to laugh like that. Some souls don't need to suffer to know pain. They carry it in their blood, in the memory of something they don't recall, yet that lives within them. Ealasaid seemed like a strong woman. The kind who walked tall without seeking shelter, with a clear gaze and steady pulse, as if the world had never cut her with its edge. And yet beneath that calm mistaken for certainty, something older burned, a sensitivity so deep it couldn't be named without breaking. She never spoke of it. No one did. But she listened. What others ignored she heard. The creak of a sick branch, the restless murmur of a stream before a storm, the breathing of a frightened animal. And when she stood still in the middle of the forest, it was as if the natural world recognized her, remembered her. Sometimes, she believed animals understood her better than people. Maybe because she never needed to explain herself to be believed. Maybe because in the language of the unseen, Ealasaid was already part of the whole. She didn't know where that gift came from. Nor why, out of so many, she was the one able to perceive what went unspoken. She had grown up with the certainty that something in her blood had yet to be revealed, an old story pulsing through her veins, but one no one had dared to tell her. She didn't know pain. Not by name, not by form. But within her echoed something that vibrated as if she had already been wounded many times, in other lives or in the dreams of her ancestors. And perhaps that's why she was ready. Even if she didn't know it. Even if she didn't want to be. Because some souls are born with a different kind of strength, not to endure, but to remember that every wound is also a door. Chapter 3. True love asks for no promises, only roots. Have you forgotten who I am? Evander asked Struan, the moment they stepped through the heavy oak door that guarded the strategy room. There were no windows in the chamber, a deliberate design to keep curious eyes at bay. Torches lined the stone walls, their flames the only source of light. The fireplace was cold, though the air still carried the scent of spent firewood. I never forget, Struan replied with a crooked smile, brushing off his friend's foul mood. I did you a favor. You were intimidating your betrothed, and you might need to court her if you expect her to agree to marry you. Intimidating? Evander raised an eyebrow. I was polite and courteous. Struan shook his head, and dropped into one of the oak chairs surrounding the large table, cluttered with maps and figures representing allied and enemy forces. Afraid not. The girl looked like she was searching for a way out. She's not like the women, who usually throw themselves at your feet. Ealasaid is inexperienced. If you treat her like any other, she'll run. And what do you suggest? That I indulge her every whim like you do with your wife? Struan snorted, not bothering to argue. He found it hard to deny Isbale anything, even more now that she carried his child. Still, he had yielded to her wishes for the good of the clan. If anyone can convince Ealasaid she'll be happy here, it's Isbale. You should hope they become friends. I should. Evander leaned against the stone wall. It's in your interest. If she meddles in my engagement, at least she won't put her pregnancy at risk. Struan didn't argue. If Ealasaid was with her, he'd be more at ease. He doubted the Englishwoman had ever lifted a finger in her life. She only wants to help Ealasaid adjust. How much does Isbale know about the truth behind this engagement? Evander asked, narrowing his eyes. Struan sighed, patient. Evander knew he would never betray him, but since the royal parchment had arrived 3 days ago, his temper had grown darker still. Only what the rest of the clan knows. She believes Ealasaid is an unfortunate young woman forced into marriage. She doesn't know the real reason. And she hasn't asked. She has, Struan admitted. And I told her the same thing you told your brothers and the rest of the clan, that this alliance with the daughter of an English baron is beneficial, and having the Baron of Yorkshire on our side will give us an advantage in future conflicts. Evander clicked his tongue. That Isbale believed that tale. I understand, she's just a woman. A woman you shouldn't underestimate, Struan warned. Evander looked away, dismissive. What irritates me is that my warriors think I need the help of an Englishman to win my battles. How can they think that of me? Because they believe in you. You've earned their loyalty. Evander nodded. It was true. He had spilled blood, sweat and effort to earn the clan's respect, and he'd do it again as many times as needed. I hate lying to them, he admitted after a pause. He had committed atrocities, employed questionable tactics, but he had never lied to them. So do I, Struan agreed. But it's too risky for anyone to know who Ealasaid really is before the wedding. You don't trust my men? I trust their loyalty, not their silence, nor their wives. This way is better. We spare them the burden of the secret. Evander nodded again. Ealasaid is still unmarried, because few know the truth about her father. And it must stay that way until Roxburghshire is mine. That territory bordered the lands of the Rutherfords. Controlling it would give them a prime position, especially now that the war with Donal MacAlpin, Isbel's father, was escalating. Donal was determined to destroy them. But he wouldn't succeed. Not as long as Evander lived. He was willing to do anything. Even marry an Englishwoman. He despised the English for centuries of wrongs and bloodshed. And he held little more affection for their women. Yet Ealasaid had unsettled him. He hadn't expected someone so beautiful, with those clear eyes and that serene face that, for a moment, had made him fight the urge to kiss her. King William was clear in his letter, said Struan. He won't give you Roxburghshire, unless Ealasaid consents of her own free will. Evander laughed without humour. He hadn't counted on that. He had pressured Eleanor of Aquitaine, still powerful in the shadows of the throne, to force the Baron of Yorkshire to hand over his daughter. He had hoped that by the time King William learned of the union, it would be too late. But the Queen Mother had surprised him. She fears losing her lands. As long as she holds Roxburghshire, she can keep watch on us. Or maybe she feels something for her bastard daughter. Evander laughed for real at that. Since Struan had fallen for Isbel, he had grown sentimental. The only reason she gave her a dowry was because Henry forced her hand. Perhaps, murmured Struan. Either way, she'll have to keep her word. She will if she wants to avoid an uprising. She signed 3 documents granting Roxburghshire as dowry to whoever marries Ealasaid. One is with her, one with Eleanor, and one with me. If she breaks her word, I'll make sure every clan hears of it. No one respects a king who doesn't honor his pacts. In the Highlands, a promise meant more than an oath. Everyone knew that. Except Donal MacAlpin. That's why Evander planned to kill him as soon as he had the chance. You never told me how you got that document. Evander smiled wryly. And I never will. I'll take that to the grave. Struan didn't press. If Evander wished to keep it secret, he would respect that. William will keep his word. But he's found a way to bend you. How do you plan to win over the girl? Win her over? Evander repeated, puzzled. What does love have to do with marriage? He pushed away from the wall and paced the room. He was willing to convince Ealasaid he would be a good husband. That she'd be protected, that she'd lack for nothing. He'd be a good father to their children. He would never be like his own father, cruel, dismissive, unfeeling. I used to think the same before Isbel, said Struan. But a happy marriage is easier when there's love. Believe me, I speak from experience. Evander looked at him, resisting the urge to draw the dagger from his boot, not out of hatred, but to put him out of his misery. Love had softened his fiercest warrior. But Evander didn't aspire to that. He wanted only one thing, to make the Rutherford clan the most powerful in the Highlands. I won't let any woman rule over me. Love isn't for me. My bride must respect me, not love me. She'll obey, bear my children, and be lady of the clan. And how do you expect to get all that without love? Struan didn't add that, even with love, many women refuse to obey. For God's sake, Struan, Evander growled. Ealasaid was raised for a marriage of convenience. She doesn't expect love. And what if she knows the truth? What if she's allied with Eleanor? It was a doubt Evander had shared. But nothing in the girl he had just met had raised his suspicions. She seemed sincere, even innocent. Still, he would not lower his guard. He had learned to read people's faces better than most, and a 20-year-old girl was no match for him. She seems sincere, but I'll make sure. And if she's lying? Evander smiled coldly. Then she'll have no choice but to marry me willingly. I'd rather she lied to me. You've much to learn about women. Evander shrugged. I just have to make her believe she can manipulate me. Like Isbel does with you, he mocked. Struan snorted but didn't respond. Once Ealasaid believed she was in control, she'd tell William she wanted the marriage. Evander had no qualms about lying. It wouldn't be the first time. Ealasaid would never know the truth. By the time she found out, it would be too late. You must treat her with care. I would never harm a woman physically, Evander said coldly. I know. But English ladies aren't as strong. They cry easily. Their hearts break faster. I know how to handle an Englishwoman. Struan sighed, convinced Ealasaid would flee the next time Evander was alone with her. But he chose not to argue. As you ordered, the knights who escorted her are already on their way back to England. Her maid as well. Chapter 4. Where the soul recognizes its reflection, no distance matters. Is England very different from the Highlands? Isbel asked as they walked around the fortress grounds. Ealasaid didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath of the Highland air, and let her gaze wander over the fields blanketed with wildflowers. Spring was her favorite season. Something about its arrival reminded her that life could bloom even after the harshest winter. A cold gust brushed her face, but she didn't flinch. The chill was familiar, even welcome. Since childhood, she'd withstood the cold better than anyone. She would ride out when others stayed by the fire, never once complaining about numb fingers or windburned cheeks. She had always believed, without knowing why, that this resilience came from some secret bond with nature. In the Highlands that feeling didn't fade, it deepened. As if the land itself was calling to her without words. As if something in her blood answered an ancient summons. I had never left my father's lands, she said at last. Isbel didn't press her, and Ealasaid was grateful. Others often grew impatient with her silences, mistaking them for aloofness or oddity. But this woman, who barely knew her, seemed to understand instinctively. The castle where I was raised isn't so different from this one. I've never been to England, Isbel said, but I've always been curious. They say the men there are cruel and… She stopped when she saw Ealasaid turn her head to look at her. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to offend or speak ill of your homeland. Ealasaid shook her head gently. I've heard the same said about Highland men, that they're harsh with their women. She paused, weighing her words before adding softly, but I've seen how your husband looks at you. And how does he look at me? Like my father looks at my mother, with love. She hesitated, searching for another word, something that didn't sound like a child's tale. And something more. Isbel burst out laughing. With love and the urge to strangle me, she joked. Ealasaid smiled but didn't respond right away. She glanced briefly at Isbel's rounded belly, not daring to name what that image stirred in her. Struan looks at you kindly. I know you were joking. I was. Isbel looked at her with warmth before adding in a calm voice, no one in the Rutherford clan will hurt you, Ealasaid. Least of all your betrothed. Evander respects women. I've seen him strike a man for mistreating his wife. You don't need to fear him. Ealasaid nodded, lips slightly parted. She didn't fear him. That was the one thing she could say with certainty. Evander stirred something inside her, but none of it had a name. She thought she was going to say it, try to explain, but then the landscape changed and the words dissolved. They had passed through a grove, and emerged into a clearing where a pond of crystalline water reflected the sky's light. Ealasaid stopped, as if the air had grown heavier, more sacred. There's no one here, she murmured, without thinking, as if afraid her voice might break the spell. Unlike the bustling riverbank where they'd earlier seen women, children and elders, this place was pure silence. A sanctuary untouched by the world. Few come here, Isbel explained as Ealasaid stepped closer to the water. Why? Habit, I suppose. The river's always been their meeting place. The Rutherfords are people of routine. Aren't you a Rutherford? I am now. But I was born the daughter of Laird MacAlpin. Ealasaid didn't need to know much about clans to recognize that name. During the journey, she had heard of the enmity between the MacAlpins and the Rutherfords, of old feuds that still shaped the roads. She remembered how the route had been detoured 2 full days to avoid dangerous territories. She turned to Isbale, a question forming inside her. "Doesn't it hurt to be far from your father?" Isbale lowered her gaze. "He's not the man I thought he was. He'd rather see me dead than married to Struan." The words fell like stones into the water. Ealasaid stared at her, not knowing what to say. In her world, fathers were pillars, unquestionable figures. It was hard to imagine one wishing his daughter dead. "You married without his consent," she whispered, still stunned. "I did," said Isbale with a smile that wasn't quite sad. "It's a long story. I never imagined I'd fall in love with a Rutherford. But I did." Ealasaid stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry your father won't accept it." The rest hung in the air between them. Maybe she shouldn't have said it, but she couldn't help herself. "At least you married for love." Isbale was about to respond when a young girl came running. Her hair was tied in a simple braid, and she looked younger than both of them. "What is it, Marsaili?" Isbale asked when she saw her face. Marsaili bent over, gasping for breath. When she caught it, she looked up. "It's the dog. When I went to your room to change the sheets, the puppies were crying, and she was lying in a pool of blood." Isbale took off running before the sentence was finished. Ealasaid froze for a moment, then followed her without hesitation. She found her kneeling beside the dog, frozen with fear. Ealasaid knelt beside her and checked, the animal was still breathing. "I need a needle, thread, cloths and clean water," she ordered firmly to Marsaili, who had just arrived. "Can you save her?" Isbale whispered, on the verge of tears. "Yes. She's not going to die," Ealasaid said, more confidently than she felt. She pulled a small pouch of herbs from the pocket of her dress, and began selecting the ones she needed as the supplies arrived. Isbale, though shaken, followed her instructions. Ealasaid gently cradled the dog in her lap, murmuring soothing words. The animal, as if she understood, allowed it. "Do you know how to make a salve?" she asked Isbale, who shook her head. "It doesn't matter." She was used to doing things alone. In her father's castle, no one understood her love for animals. Some even called it sacrilege. But Ealasaid believed in a God who valued all lives, and who had given her this gift. "Everything will be fine," she whispered, stroking the dog's back before beginning to stitch. "Thank you for saving her," Isbale said an hour later, hugging her through tears. The dog slept, soothed by the infusion Ealasaid had prepared. Though exhausted, she looked peaceful. "Thank God you came today. Where did you learn to care for animals?" "I've always loved them. Cedric, the stable hand, taught me the basics. The rest I learned on my own." "What happened?" Struan asked as he entered, holding a white cat in his arms. "The dog had complications," Isbale explained, stepping toward him. Ealasaid saved her. Struan wrapped his arms around her and held her close. The cat leapt onto the dog and curled up beside her, licking her fur. She half opened her eyes and let him be. Ealasaid watched them with tenderness. Many said animals didn't know how to love, but she didn't believe that. She saw it in that moment. "I love you." For a second, Ealasaid thought he'd said it to the cat. But it was Struan, looking at Isbale before kissing her. Ealasaid had never heard a man say, "I love you," to his wife in front of others. Not even her father.